Dear all, welcome to today's civil society session on meaningful youth engagement for an inclusive recovery, led by Plan International and AIESEC. My name is Krista Zimmerman, and I am the Asia Pacific Head of Influencing for Plan International, an international government organization that advances children's rights and equality for girls. It has been an honor to co-design today's session with AIESEC, a global platform for young people to develop their leadership potential through international internships and volunteer opportunities. We have an exciting slate of speakers and panelists today, and I'll introduce them in more detail just ahead of their respective parts of the program. But I'd like to take just a few minutes here at the beginning to frame the issues we will be discussing today. While there are many headlines across Asia about our aging population, it's important to remember that we are actually the most youthful region in the world, with over 1.1 billion people under the age of 30. These young people have massive potential to shape the region for the better and to help make our post-pandemic recovery a resilient, inclusive, and dynamic one, if they have a seat at the table. Despite the progress in youth engagement across various institutions, including governments in Asia, there are still challenges. Finding a seat at the table is not a given for many young people, and it can be even more difficult for those who are double marginalized, those living with disabilities, members of the LGBTIQ+ community, and of course, girls and young women, due to the discrimination and gender inequality. Nowhere in today's world are girls and boys, men and women treated equally, and we will have to tackle this to ensure meaningful youth engagement. Gender inequality affects all of us, but it is particularly unfair to girls and young women. Being a girl or a young woman often means being less valued, having fewer opportunities, and less pay for the same job. During the COVID-19 pandemic, girls and young women have borne the brunt of unpaid care work, struggled to receive reproductive health services, and have witnessed a disturbing increase in gender-based violence and early and forced marriage. They must have a seat at the table if we are not only to recover, but to build back better. Making sure programs engage all young people from vulnerable and marginalized backgrounds can be a challenge without the proper enabling environment. In the research that will be presented later in this program, young women in focus groups shared how not having the resources to access youth engagement made it difficult for them to decide and actively participate in programs. Meaningful youth engagement means creating opportunities for all young people, but especially young women and other vulnerable and marginalized groups to exercise power and voice, not only in the future, but today. Countries that invest in true and meaningful youth engagement are investing in tomorrow's leaders, and as a result, the future of their nations as a whole. We will now move to a panel discussion with 4 experts that will explore the concept of meaningful youth engagement and its linkages to a stimulating and equitable recovery for the region. It will examine how young people gain a meaningful say in what building back better looks like, and how we will address some of the specific challenges identified in ADB and ILO's report on youth unemployment in the context of COVID-19. We will also learn about its contribution to a greener economy and how age-intentional approaches have led to an emphasis on ecological equity and resulted in intergenerational collaboration. Our first speaker will be 𝐈𝐧𝐿𝐴𝐺. She will unpack. Iris is the Meaningful Youth Engagement Specialist for ADB Youth for Asia. As part of the Youth for Asia team, she mainstreams the practice of meaningful youth engagement in the design of youth participatory programs, engagement initiatives, and knowledge generation. Iris will unpack a coherent framework on meaningful youth engagement developed by Plan International, Youth for Asia, and AIESEC with the support of the Youth Employment Funders Group and the City Foundation. Iris, the floor is yours.
Thanks for the introduction, Krista, and to Plan International for inviting us today. I'm glad to be here and to join other partners this morning. And as a starting point for today's discussion, as Krista shared, I'll be taking us through a framework for meaningful youth engagement that we recently developed for funders, implementers, and youth in youth employment contexts. Next slide, please. But first, what is ADB Youth for Asia? ADB Youth for Asia enables young people and governments to work together to deliver project components contributing to the Sustainable Development Goals. We aim for ADB to have youth inclusive policies, programs, and projects, and for youth to be empowered in intergenerational partnerships, which are institutionalized and strengthened. Next slide. Since 2013, Youth for Asia has been developing solutions that leverage young people's voices, insights, and actions in partnership with youth, governments, civil society organizations, ADB, and other stakeholders, and through the use of technology and other forms of innovation. Given the extent that we work with young people on a daily basis, ADB Youth for Asia is committed to promoting their meaningful youth engagement in our operations. Next slide, please. But what do we mean by meaningful youth engagement? We take inspiration from the roadmap that we developed, and in developing this roadmap, we reviewed literature on youth engagement and collected data from funders, implementers, and youth. All of this to find out that meaningful youth engagement, or MYE, occurs when, under enabling conditions, youth representatives actively participate throughout the program lifecycle and enter into youth adult partnerships that empower youth and may contribute to positive and long-lasting labor market outcomes. By writing about young people this way, the definition implies that young people engaged in a program are its driving force and are not simply passive beneficiaries or recipients of development interventions and services. Next slide, please. Well, what makes youth engagement meaningful in this context is the presence of 5 pillars that essentially put it together. One is youth diversity and representation. Number 2 is youth engagement enabling environment. Number 3 is youth adult partnerships. Number 4 is youth participation, and youth empowerment is the last one. The slide you're seeing here shows them all in one framework, which we will dive into in the next slides. So let's start with the first pillar. Next slide, please. The first pillar is on youth diversity and representation. And this pillar recognizes that young people are not a homogeneous group, and that each youth group comes with their own experiences, needs, and access to opportunities. When engaging young people in the program, this pillar makes us ask the question, which youth do we engage, and do they represent the population targeted by the program? As a pillar, it focuses on fairness, or whether roles and structures are distributed equitably among young people in the program, on inclusivity, or have efforts been made so that young people in the program represent the diversity of its target population, especially with respect to gender, ability, ethnicity, among others, and context specificity, or are young people's specific circumstances reflected in the program and by the youth representatives themselves. Next slide, please. Pillar number 2 is on engagement enabling environment. And practicing MYE basically relies on having conducive program environments. In the research, nearly all the funders and all the implementers and youth that we spoke with discussed how broad institutional support was needed to sustain youth engagement. So youth engagement specific capacity and resources were found to be critical to working with youth in the programs. An engagement-enabling environment is characterized by safety, conduciveness, and accountability. In other words, programs need to keep young people safe and promote their best interests, provide youth-friendly spaces, methods, and resources, and hold stakeholders accountable by hearing young people's inputs without judgment and by providing feedback on how these will be leveraged in the program. Next slide, please. The third pillar is on youth-adult partnerships, and this is basically the foundation of MYE practices. These partnerships enable young people to take a valued position in society and for communities to benefit from their contributions, ideas, and energy. Youth for Asia particularly believes that intergenerational collaboration brings the generations together effectively. And what makes these kinds of collaboration genuine are when there's shared value creation, or where partnerships create value and provide net benefits to both adults and young people. Equality, which ensures youth and adults are both treated as valued stakeholders and contributors. Joint work, where youth and adults share common objectives, decision making, and ownership of the initiative, and actually learn from each other. And finally, practice common norms such as trust, acceptance, respect, mutuality, and reciprocity. Next slide. But all these three pillars are not as effective without the last two pillars. Pillar number 4 is youth participation, and it recognizes that young people are strategy shapers and development actors in their own right. They accelerate progress towards sustainable and inclusive growth, and to promote meaningful youth engagement, it needs to be rights-based, meaning that we need to recognize the right to participate is also extended to young people, that they need to be involved in decisions affecting their lives. We also recognize that the right to participate serves as a prerequisite for claiming other rights, including social and economic rights. Youth participation is also characterized by age and developmentally appropriateness. Youth engagement opportunities need to be right to size. They need to align young people's roles and responsibilities with their developmental capabilities and needs. In other words, what they do should neither be too easy nor too difficult to actually accomplish successfully, to accomplish well. Finally, continuous. So youth have to participate in the full spectrum of project intervention so that it covers all stages of a project and aspects of decision making. Next slide, please. Finally, the pillar on youth empowerment. Quoting the roadmap, meaningful youth engagement both culminates from and leads to a sense of general multidimensional empowerment of young people. Simply put, when we engage young people, we empower them. And this in turn further encourages their engagement in the program and beyond. This is what we normally observe among young people we work with, who not only experience self-empowerment, but also lead, if not contribute, to change in communities and wider systems. Based on what I just said, youth empowerment has the following characteristics. Personal empowerment, where a young person is involved in decisions and programs that affect them, they acquire a sense of ownership of the program that motivates them to learn further, build their skills, and access tools and networks they need to contribute. This process ultimately results in their growth and development. The second is community level impact. When young people are meaningfully engaged, this leads to the creation of better informed, increasingly youth responsive initiatives and ideas, which can affect change in young people's communities. And finally, system level influencing. When young people build confidence, social capital, networks, and resources that enable them to work with system level actors, this allows them to address exclusion, rights violation, and social marginalization, among others. Well, all this discussion begs the question, what value does MYE provide? In our research, we found that meaningful youth engagement can benefit youth employment programs. It can lead to increased program responsiveness and quality, especially because we access new and actionable information that help design more targeted interventions. It also produces ripple effects on young people, especially as they transition to labor markets, and how their engagement, for example, helps build essential soft skills and unlocks further engagement and even employment opportunities for them and their peers. Nevertheless, I want to emphasize that the MYE framework builds on a concept that is relatively understudied in the field of youth development and in youth employment in general. There's much we still hope to know and understand about working meaningfully with young people, so our work doesn't really stop here, but it is really a good start. Thank you for your attention and have a great day.
Thank you so much for that, Iris. That was really informative and very useful. Our next panelist will talk about the importance of empowering young people in intergenerational partnerships to address the crisis of youth unemployment that has been exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic. It is my privilege to introduce to you today, Eva Dutari. Eva is the Global President of AIESEC. A proud Panamanian with a background in marketing and advertising, they define themselves as an enthusiast for equality and a firm believer in the power that lies in young people. As part of AIESEC's leadership, Eva has worked in Panama, Malaysia, Philippines, and Canada. The floor is yours, Eva.
Thank you so much, Krista, for the introduction. You very much well said, my name is Eva Lutari, and I am the current global president of AIESEC International. And AIESEC is an organization that was founded back in 1948 with the intention of creating an environment where young people could develop their leadership potential in cross-cultural environments, right? So the idea of having AIESEC as an organization or as an opportunity for young people to develop themselves was to ensure that we could provide opportunities of leadership and development for people in environments that are unknown to them or in environments where they could learn from a different culture, to ensure that we can create a more inclusive world, or a world where global peace is achieved and where humankind's potential is something that can be fulfilled. And so when we are talking about the topic of youth economic empowerment, I did want to highlight, and if you can click towards the next slide, before actually starting to go deep into the presentation, some of the key findings or some of the key elements that we were just hearing from Iris in terms of the main pillars that we are coming into, or the main findings that the report says in terms of how can we really create or provide meaningful young engagement opportunities, right? So some of those main pillars were in terms of youth diversity and representation, things around youth engagement enabling environment, youth adult partnerships, youth participation, and youth empowerment. And those are some of the key topics also that we're trying to drive in conversations when it comes to developing young people or providing opportunities for young people to work on their leadership. So if you can click to the next two slides, please. Yeah, you can go to the next one. Yeah. So when we are talking about the battle of youth employability, that is really one of the key, let's say, focuses or the key areas of impact where AIESEC is trying to develop or impact the world. And this is why, if you can go to the next slide, in the last few years, we've been working with this initiative called the 𝐿 survey, and essentially what we've been trying to do is to release a platform or provide a space for young people to actually be able to share what is their key opinion on different issues that are around the world, and what are their key insights in terms of specific problematics that they can be facing, right? And one other thing that I want to highlight from what Iris was sharing was the importance of inclusion of young people in the conversations, or the importance of recognizing that young people have the value or have the ability to create strategies to shape policies that can be more inclusive of their specific group of young persons, so that our opportunities can be more inclusive of different kinds of people. And so the 𝐿 survey has different insights, and I just wanted to take a few minutes to share some of the key insights that we learned when doing this survey, and how are they shaping the kind of initiatives that AIESEC is creating to improve youth meaningful engagement and youth employability. So if you can click to the next slide, you will see that one of the key opinions that young people have is when it comes to creating positive impact in the area or in the field of youth unemployment, the three main, let's say, sectors of people that youth has confidence on are government, private sector, and youth-led organizations, which poses a picture of great responsibility to ensure that as government, we are actually being able to generate opportunities of meaningful youth engagement, but as well as private sector and youth-led organizations, how can we properly provide those chances as well as represent the voice of young people in the topic. And if we click on the next slide, you will be able to see a second insight here is when we ask the question of what could be the biggest obstacle in performing activities that could improve your personal and professional development as a young person, the two biggest reasons that young people expressed as an issue would be lack of financial resources as well as lack of opportunities. And these two have a certain correlation with the kind of different minorities or the double marginalization that different kinds of young people have, and the importance of that kind of inclusion or meaningful youth engagement practices when it comes to the topic of youth employability and youth engagement. So if you click on the following slide, you will be able to see how on the left side of the image, 30% of our respondents felt confident about their future career. And in that sense, what we were asking people here is how do they feel in terms of their academic preparation, but as well as the kind of opportunities that they have and their ability to be able to reach those opportunities. 20% of respondents mentioned they are somewhat confident, but also something that meant or was interesting to us, an interesting insight, is when we're asking young people where do they want to work in the next 5 years, most people are trying or they're interested in the industries of business or startups or creating their own initiatives to impact the world, as well as multinational corporations. If you go into the next slide, you will be able to see here, this is how young people are rating their ability to equip themselves with the right skills and knowledge that they need, depending on the opportunities of work that will be needed in the future. And the average confidence level is quite low or not that alarming in terms of people thinking that their educational opportunities or skill developing opportunities are actually preparing for what they will be needing in the future. And that talks as well a lot about the confidence levels that the young people have in the opportunities that they currently have to develop themselves. If you click on the next slide, here you will be able to see the last insight that I wanted to bring you. And in this area, what we are talking about is the importance or the, let's say, the intention or the focus that young people have to ensure that whatever work or whatever career they are going to be engaging themselves in their future would be connected to a work that is actually meaningful or that is connected to the kind of purpose that they could have as young people. So here, again, the topic of inclusivity and ensuring that young people are able to be properly represented, then this is actually what is important in terms of that kind of connection. If you go into the next slide, I just want to spend the last few minutes talking about how we are actually working towards that vision, or what are some of the initiatives that AIESEC as an organization is doing to improve the topic of youth economic empowerment. And if you can click there, in the next slide, you will see a list of different activities that we are doing. On one side, we have our Global Talent Internship Program, which is an international program that provides opportunities for young people to take on international internship experiences and develop themselves with in a practical environment where they get to work with companies of different sizes, such as startups, middle, and also large or multinational organizations. We also have different kinds of certain virtual initiatives that we are trying to test now to adapt to the new conditions of travel due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Also, we just are launching a new program called Heading for the Future program, which aims to connect also the skill development opportunity of young people with different companies in the private sector. The YouthSpeak survey that I talked about, as well as volunteering as a member of the AIESEC network and the AIESEC organization, are just a few of the multiple initiatives that we are doing to advance that problematic, such as youth economic empowerment, along the lines of also the collaboration that we did with Plan International in the report that was presented before. And in the last slide, I just wanted to give yeah, you can click. Yeah, and in the end, like also a reminder of what this organization stands for, or what we as AIESEC really believe is how can leaders or building leadership in young people can be actually the solution for most of the issues in the world. And that's why we place confidence in working with these young people as the key to unlock a better future. So that's why we're trying to bring young people as the center of the conversation and create opportunities where we can actually find solutions or ways of providing meaningful young youth engagement opportunities for all kinds of young people out there. So yeah, that would be all from my side. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you so much for that. Our next panelist will talk about a program that inspired her to take action to achieve the SDGs and how youth at grassroots can be inspired to create meaningful change. She will also address the fundamental importance of meaningful youth engagement approaches to environmental challenges in order to promote a green recovery. It's my privilege to introduce to you today 𝐶𝐲𝐬𝐧𝐠𝐼𝐻. She is a young Nepali environmentalist who was an active ambassador and participant in Youth for Asia's Bagmati River Basin project. Following the project, she built an awareness-raising training on municipal solid waste management to bring behavioral change, creating a circular business model that provides value to the waste generated. 𝐶𝐲𝐬𝐧𝐠𝐼𝐻, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for the beautiful introduction, Krista. Namaste, one and all. As Krista already mentioned, I am 𝐶𝐲𝐬𝐧𝐠𝐼𝐻 and I'm one of the facilitators for the ADB Youth for Asia's Bagmati River Basin Youth Program, and I feel really privileged to be a part of this panel discussion today. So let me start with why we chose the Bagmati River for the program. Bagmati is a holy river and it is used for various cultural ceremonies. It is also important as a supply of drinking water for the capital city of Nepal, that is Kathmandu. However, the river has been facing massive pollution in the recent decades due to the discharge of chemicals, untreated sewage, and garbages that are thrown directly into the river. We believe that the ideas and energy youths bring to a project are capable to create a huge impact on society. A youth-led program becomes important in a country like Nepal, where almost half of the population are youths. Therefore, Bagmati River Basin Youth Program, or BRBYP, is crucial to increase the awareness and capacity for making the Bagmati River healthy and sustainable again. Next slide, please. So the main concept of our program focused on the Sustainable Development Goals, specifically on SDG 6, 12, and 13. Since I mentioned earlier that waste is still a major problem in this community, our program also focused on using the 3R principle, that is reducing, recycling, and reusing. Here, we designed two interventions, the Sustainable Development Goals training and the world's largest lesson. So the 6-week-long Sustainable Development Goals training was an intensive session for youths of 18 to 29 years, while the world's largest lesson was a 90-minute session for children from 13 to 17 years. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic, all of these sessions were completely virtual, and as a facilitator, I strongly believe that the youths were equally passionate and enthusiastic as they would have been if all the sessions were in person. Next slide, please. So we also had the future thinking and appreciative inquiry sessions in which the youths visualized their preferred future instead of focusing on the existing problem. In the sessions, the participants discovered their strengths and visualized their dreams of the future Bagmati River. Later, these very dreams were converted into project ideas which the youths have implemented in their community. Visualizing a positive future created a sense of excitement among youths, and I vividly remember a session in which we asked the participants to share their project ideas. The youths were so eager to share their ideas with others that almost all of them raised their hands. And not only were they eager, but I was struck by their imagination, their innovative ideas, their passion and willingness to come together to bring impacts to the society. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, we had the Sustainable Development Goals training. 10 youths, including myself, trained 196 other youths about the Sustainable Development Goals, the roles of youths for river conservation, and the historical and cultural importance of Bagmati. During this intervention, we also had a cross-generational consultation between NGOs, civil society, and the youths themselves. This provided us with a unique opportunity to consult with the government as well as private stakeholders, which in turn helped us to gain even more knowledge on the current development works that are being done in the Bagmati premises. This really helped us to collaborate easily with the stakeholders during the later part of the project, that is, during the implementation of the project. Next slide, please. So the same principle was also used for the world's largest lesson. This was a short intervention with a much greater impact. We trained 1,703 school students living near the Bagmati River in this 90-minute session. So from our learning in the SDG training, we customized the content because the audiences in this intervention were much younger and we wanted to reach larger audiences in a short period of time. You can also see some visualization of clean and beautiful Bagmati of some of our participants in the screen here. Beautiful, aren't they? Next slide, please. We also had the CAP score. This aims to measure the impact of the program and show whether the program was effective or not. So the Sustainable Development Goal training proved youths to be a long-term advocates for SDG as well as for the 3R practices, and the world's largest lesson helped the children and young people to aware their communities in the Bagmati River Basin. I strongly believe that this peer-to-peer learning approach of the program was an effective training pathway because peers play an integral part in a youth's life. Furthermore, the participants of the Bagmati River Basin Youth Program continue to use their learning to go to the communities and to share their messages. To date, 19 projects are supported by ADB. Next slide, please. So in this slide, you can see me and my team members preparing for an event. I really feel fortunate to be the team leader of one of the projects supported by ADB. My project, 𝐶𝐬𝐧𝐿, focuses on proper waste segregation and management at the community level. So to implement the project, we reached out to an apartment near the banks of Bagmati. And when we proposed the idea, they mentioned that they had the same idea on their mind, but didn't know where to start. They were happy to start segregation with us. Therefore, we collaborated with 𝐘𝐨𝐴, which is a private organization that has been recycling for the past 5 years. And we conducted a training session and provided 𝐷𝐞𝐽s. They are the environmental friendly bins, which you can see me carrying in one of the pictures. So these bins were distributed for proper waste segregation inside the apartment. I have been monitoring the project ever since, and the responses we have received so far has made me proud of the initiative. Next slide, please. So to sum up, youths took the initiative from the very beginning to plan the curriculum, conduct sessions, develop project ideas, and finally implement it in the community with the help of government as well as private stakeholders, making Bagmati River Basin Youth Program a perfect example of meaningful youth engagement. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sweta. That was great. The last member of the panel will share with us how ADB can incorporate learning from this session and other meaningful youth engagement knowledge into ADB operations and in helping countries integrate meaningful youth engagement into their development plans. It's my privilege today to introduce to you Director General Ramesh Subramaniam. Ramesh has been with ADB for over 25 years and is currently the Director General for Southeast Asia Regional Department. His principal focus has been on economic policy and structural reforms, as well as infrastructure financing. He has worked on shaping ADB's engagement overall and in 23 countries directly. Ramesh is passionate about helping countries overcome crises and manage post-disaster situations. He's the perfect end to our panel of experts. The floor is yours, Ramesh.
Thank you so much, Krista, and to Plan International as well as to AIESEC. As the previous speakers are speaking, I was actually thinking how nice if it would have been if we had all been in a physical space. I recall particularly the 2015 annual meetings in Yokohama, where the youth all had come together. We had a fantastic, series of sessions. Very fantastic overview from all of you. I also want to particularly appreciate Ibu Osa's remarks on how Indonesia is handling what the region, Indonesia as well as the world have been going through in recent years, but also taking a medium to long-term perspective of the role that youth play. And the way she brought in the gender dimensions, I also want to particularly appreciate. And of course, looking at the pandemic related challenges that Indonesia as well as the region faces, what we can do, and the climate issues that Ibu Osa pointed out, totally underscore. And Iris, Eva, Sweta, fantastic overview that you provided on Eva's survey and the role of the government and the role that resources play. Certainly, you do need resources of various type. What role the public and private sector play, she highlighted as a result of the survey. And Sweta, as you were speaking, in fact, just so coincidentally, I think it's a nice coincidence. Got a message from a colleague on oneworlddata.org. As you were speaking about Bagmati River, I was thinking about Pasig River, which is close to where I live, and I'm sure a lot of people from the Philippines are tuned in. 81% of ocean plastics come from Asian rivers, and Philippines alone contributes 1/3 of this total. So that's something we can be inspired from the work that you've done in Nepal. I want to go to the next slide. I talk a little bit about the meaningful youth engagement and ADB operations under the Youth for Asia model. Iris already presented a fantastic overview. So here, a clear institutional example of how ADB has been engaging. I would say probably one of the most meaningful things that we've done ever since YFA Youth for Asia was launched in 2013. This is made up of a core youth team that reports into our Sustainable Development and Climate Change department. You see some of the parameters. We have a team of central core members of youth advisors, youth project designers, as well as people who support on research. We've got over 150 consultants who are working with us. And see the network, it's 13,000 plus local young citizens who are participating directly as well as indirectly in ADB operations, and the impact that it has been brought has been enormous. And I'm going to talk to you, going to the next slide, of some of the concrete examples that we've seen. What you're seeing here in this screen, and the next one would be on Indonesia. Here it's in Cirebon city in Indonesia. It's a study of poverty and social analysis that Youth for Asia has been involved in very closely. 2 coordinators and over 21 local youth ambassadors were engaged, and it resulted in 1,000 plus online survey, very rich focus group discussions. You see some of the publications on the site, and 61 local communities engaged. And this is something in terms of engaging local communities, youth do it really, really nicely. There are so many other examples to talk about. But Cirebon example is actually a fantastic one for us to look at. Now, slide 4, if you go to the next one, also an example from Indonesia. Now, this one is from Youth Financial Inclusion, related to youth financial inclusion. This is something particularly we are very, very proud of, and also fortunate to have worked with youth ambassadors in Indonesia, over 100 plus engaged, and 7,500 survey respondents. Now, this is across the entire spread of the country. Indonesia, as you know, archipelagic country, huge country, and there are vulnerable groups across the entire spectrum of the country. We engage through the survey, through the youth ambassadors, and a very strong network of universities and academic institutions that were engaged, as well as over 200 hackathon ideas that we received as part of this work. Going to the next slide, this is something that we launched in 2020. In fact, we started thinking about it in 2019, and then it was launched in 2020. This is in the ASEAN context. It's what is called the SEEDS, or Southeast Asia Development Symposium. Because of the pandemic last year, we did the first one in virtual format in March, and the second one was done in November. superb youth participation. Here we had a very strong team of 10 Youth for Asia core team members who worked with us in shaping the program. And we had over 20 youth facilitators that worked with us. And we had, this concept or the phrase intergenerational, that's so important. We had close to 100 intergenerational workshop participants who joined. The first one focused on, the March symposium focused on the pandemic as it was emerging, but also digitalization, which is quite critical, well, always, but particularly in the post-pandemic context. And the November one focused on collaboration. And who would be better than youth to engage in terms of collaboration. The next slide, it also shows the Southeast Asia Development Symposium output. You can see a summary of the insights from the workshops. They highlight the pushes, the pulls, which affect the young people's aspirations. Ibu Oza, as well as the other speakers, talked about the impact of the pandemic. And particularly if you see ratios such as the NEET, not in employment, education, or training, that ratio, unfortunately, has been going up in the last about 12, 13 months or so because of the pandemic. Now, the insights that you're seeing on the screen, they're being currently used to develop knowledge products. And equally important is how can we operationalize all these concerns that we are hearing, as well as the ideas. Because every issue, every concern is also an opportunity, and that's what we are looking at now. And the next slide is to shift to another part of the ASEAN region. This is in the Greater Mekong sub-region. Here, meaningful youth engagement through a very, very critical sector. It's agriculture, natural resources sector, particularly in the pandemic context, in terms of there has been a lot of pull or push, depending on whichever way you look at it. What can we do to make agriculture practices more sustainable and for the region to ensure food security? The parameters that you see, I won't repeat here. What we are also trying to achieve here is bringing in youth engagement into what Eva talked about. Public sector role is very, very critical. We have a long-standing program in the GMS or the Greater Mekong sub-region on core agriculture and core environmental practices. We want to bring the youth and the young people, as well as the coordinators, as well as ambassadors, in shaping our program in the future. So that takes me to some concluding points that I wanted to share with you. I'll go to the next slide, the last slide. Here, engaging young people meaningfully is so important. That's needless for me to say, but it's not without its challenges. And we've learned a lot of valuable lessons over the last 8 years, going back to 2013. Lots of positive lessons. Basically, we need to do a lot more than what we've been doing. Among the key challenges that we've encountered is convincing stakeholders of the value of meaningful youth engagement and projects. It's not unusual for public sector officials or private sector to see young people as a risky partner. Many people still believe that old people like me to be wise, but that's definitely not the case. I have 2 youth members at home full of ideas, and this concept of intergenerational cooperation or knowledge sharing so critical, and there is lots to pick up from youth. It's also important not to underestimate the operational issues with young people, which make a bespoke youth initiative like the Youth for Asia so critical. And to close, I'd like to point out that integrating MYE, or meaningful youth engagement, in ADB operations has been a continuous journey, an iterative one, but continuous, and also a sustainable one. And we are learning gradually how to bring youth into our knowledge work and design and operations work. And there is still much that we can learn from young people. The pollution case that I mentioned in response to what Sweta presented, that's something we are putting a program called M4, Make Manila More Maganda, and we will be unveiling it in the next couple of months or so. We want to engage very closely with you. Thank you so much, Krista, for this opportunity, and thanks again to PLAN and AIESEC.
Thank you so much, Ramesh, and I love that idea of making Manila more maganda, because it's where I grew up, and I think it's maganda, but it can be even more so. So now we're going to move to the session where we'll have an opportunity for you to ask questions of our panelists and for them to provide us with some answers. You can submit questions on the online forum through the ADB annual meeting website, and we hope that many of you will do that. But I'd like to start by taking the moderator's prerogative of asking the first question. And I was really struck by something that Eva said in her presentation. It seemed very simple, but I think it's probably a lot more difficult and complex in reality. And that's the idea of simply placing confidence in youth. Sounds easy, but I think it's probably a little more complex in practice. And so I was wondering, Eva, if you could kick us off by giving us some tangible examples of what that looks like and feels like to young people. How do they know and experience when older people are placing confidence in them?
Yeah, thank you so much, Krista, for that question. I believe it's extremely relevant to the topic. And of course, as a youth representative and someone who leads around 40,000 young people around the world, is very exciting for me to answer that. I believe that just to give context, or the reason why that is something we are very close to is because we've been doing placing young people in internship opportunities with companies, or even in some kind of projects with government or development banks such as ADB, among many others in other regions of the world, where we are able to provide spaces for young people to either have discussions of ideas, for example, in events where we are having panels such as this one, and they are getting feedback, or they are getting, advisory from adults, or how we're calling them also in the report, or people who are in current positions of power. Or we can also get those kinds of experiences by placing people directly in internship opportunities, where they are able to work with people in other generations and solve problematics that either inside of the private sector or outside, depending on the kind of projects that they are working in. And so what we have seen or observed in our experience working with young people is, first of all, higher confidence in themselves, right? And this ability of believing hey, I actually can do something in the world, something that is connected to what matters to me as a young person, and something that allows me to, be fulfilled, or be able to fulfill my potential, or fulfill the things that really matter to me. And then I think the second thing beyond the self-confidence is more of that more intangible sense of hope or opportunity that things can actually get better once you are given that responsibility of actually making an idea that you're having in mind happen in order to be a reality. And I would say maybe the last thing, it's just also a bit of, I think young people can feel grounded when they get that responsibility, or when they feel trusted, or when they are put in a position with, resources and power to execute a certain project, execute a certain idea. And that grounding also provides a certain level of empathy or understanding how different industries are actually working, or how actually policy making or decision making in an institutional level works, which allows them to understand better what kind of career path they want to take forward, or where is the area where they actually want to contribute for the world to be better, but also for them to improve themselves as people. So I believe those are some of the key feelings that young people have when they are being trusted, or when they are being given actual space for conversation or responsibility to work in the issues that matter the most to them. Yeah.
Great, thank you so much for that. So I'm going to turn now to some questions that have been submitted by our audience. And the first one is, someone's wondering about what are the common barriers in participation, in youth participating in government or community affairs? Then, how did you overcome these barriers? I thought maybe we'd turn to Shweta for this one, since she has direct firsthand knowledge of this based on the presentation that she shared with us.
Sure. Thank you for the question. So when I was working in the Bagmati River Basin Youth Program, I mentioned earlier that we had some private sector as well as government stakeholders consultation. So when we consulted with youths in the beginning, when we were taking sessions, so I think they were a bit hesitant to, open up with the government officials. They weren't a bit trusting them, I would say. So when we had this meeting, I believe both parties were equally interested to, the government stakeholders were interested to listen from the youths, and the youths were interested to share what they want the government or the private sectors to do. So I think if we bring the intergenerations or different generations together to discuss, I think there will be some sort of dialogue, and we would not have to face the difficulties we think we would face, if we are, face to face with the stakeholders. So yeah, I think interaction would be the key here.
Great, thank you so much. That's really helpful advice. And then we have another really interesting question, actually. It's how do we build the capacity of adult stakeholders to engage young people in a meaningful way, and also to do so early enough, that it can have real impact? I think for this one, it'd be great to hear both from, an adult and a young person. So maybe we'll start with you, Ramesh, give us your views on this.
Thanks, Krista. That's a very important question. What we have learned through our projects, as well as in my case personally, is the need to increase awareness. Diversity always helps. I think Ibu also talked about. If you are bringing in a diverse group of people of all ages as well as background, clearly, that helps a lot. We have seen in some of the projects, like for instance, the Southeast Asia Development Symposium that I mentioned, we had more experienced people talking about digitalization. When the young people came in, they spoke about digitalization or climate change. The views that they brought were very different. So when you have a group of people working together, when you have diverse views coming, so that's very, very enriching. So that's increasing that awareness, because there is clearly a perception gap with regard to experience that youth obviously will not have, which comes through the years. That's one. Second is types and functions. Clearly, youth are far more agile when it comes to certain functions, particularly anything to do with digital or digital media. Youth would be much more agile. Talking to people of a similar age group, clearly youth will have much better inroads talking to young people, but as well as actually, in fact, even older people, particularly survey experience. We've seen actually much more interesting if you have young people involved. And the third is creating, the need for us to create that feeling of trust. Accountability obviously is important. But we need to create that feeling of trust that, look, we trust you. We are going to be giving you this project. We know that you'll be able to deliver, but you also please be aware that accountability comes with it. So I think those are some of the things that I picked up, Krista.
Great, that's really helpful. And I thought that'd be great to also, I know, Sweta, you just answered the previous question, but would you like to weigh in on this one as well? What can we do to capacitate adult stakeholders?
I would say that we as youths can, show ourselves, I think working with the adults will prove that youths are capable and youths can, do wonders. So I think working together and having this sense of intergenerational dialogues or work would help. If that answers the question, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I think that's a great perspective, because in some ways what you're saying is, let's learn by doing. Let's do it, and then exactly. we will figure out the challenges and we will capacitate one another. So my next question is for Iris, and it's specifically on the research that you presented. Did you also look into the positive youth development framework? And what similarities or differences did you see when you were crafting the meaningful youth engagement framework?
Thanks, Krista. We actually the MYE roadmap actually builds on the positive youth development framework. The PYD framework, PYD approach emphasizes that we see young people to have positive assets that just need further capacity, further development. So one of the things, if you noticed in the pillar, is the emphasis that young people do have valuable contributions to development, but at the same time recognizing that they do need support, especially in terms of capacity, in terms of resources, to be able to live up to that potential that they have. So it does build on that, but it also emphasizes other pieces, such as the importance of the intergenerational collaboration and how genuine that has to be, as well as the emphasis on diversity and inclusion. So it's related because it expands the approach.
Thanks, Iris. That's really helpful. And actually, I'd like to send the next question to you as well, because I know this is something that Youth for Asia has really been doing a lot of thinking about, and you in particular, which is how do we reach out to more young people as volunteers, participants, to have a sit at the table, given the risks and the challenges that are presented by the pandemic?
One thing that we've been actively exploring is how we can maximize our partnerships with youth organizations and youth-focused organizations. Even before the pandemic, reaching the hard-to-reach has always really been a challenge. And one way that we've been able to at least help bridge that gap is to work with organizations such as Plan, as you know, but also with local youth organizations who mobilize young people in their communities. So I think that one is a starting point. But at the same time, I think the other one is to provide resources that help bridge the digital divide. A learning that we had last year was that young people who are outside cities will not always have stable internet connection. In fact, even staying in a city does not even guarantee a stable internet connection, much less access to devices. So when we're going to organize spaces with young people, it's important to also make sure that resources are provided and staff or organizers are capacitated to provide and empowered to provide those resources and support. Back to you.
Thank you. And I know, Sweta, during your presentation, you talked about the need to do online engagement with the youth that were participating in your project. But it really seemed like you felt like it was almost an asset that, it was a challenge, but one that didn't hamper the project or the enthusiasm. I was wondering if you wanted to share with us a little bit more about that and kind of what the challenges were, but also, what the opportunities were to having to do these things online.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. So we had all the sessions completely online, but we implemented the project after, the lockdown was lifted in the country. So let me start with the challenges at first. So when we started the program, all of the participants weren't familiar with each other or familiar with us as facilitators. So there was a problem of, closing the video and not speaking up in the beginning. But as we moved on with the sessions and as we made the presentations, the trainings more interactive, I think they started opening up and that challenge was easily overcome. So instead of that, the opportunities I see is that because of the pandemic, all of us were at home and we didn't have to go to schools or we didn't have to go to colleges because the participants ranged from high school to someone who was doing their PhD. So I think that gave us an opportunity to come together online and share and learn from each other. So that was a great opportunity for all of us. And I think because of the pandemic and because the sessions were online, we could, discuss when we wanted to. And since it was online, like we could just, message someone and say that, can you help me with this? And we came online and just discussed the topics. So I think that was really good. Which wouldn't have been possible if all the sessions were in person, because meeting at a place at different parts of the day for different groups would be a bit difficult. So I think that was an opportunity for us.
Thank you so much. And I think it'll be great to hear from Eva on this as well, because you're now in the position of running an organization that places youth into volunteer positions and internships, and of course that's been very affected by the pandemic. And we also have a question online that maybe you could take at the same time, which is, how can youth interested in volunteering start out? What meaningful steps and actions should they take? And maybe you can address that in the pandemic context as well as more generally.
Yeah. All right. Thank you so much. I think in the side of youth engagement in an online environment during the pandemic environment, one of the key opportunities that we have seen is that young people having more time for themselves also means that they want to invest more in opportunities where they can feel like they are providing value or gaining value, right? So I believe that young people engaging in volunteer opportunities, which also leads me to the next question that was just asked online. In an online, like the pandemic does not have to be an obstacle. It can be an opportunity because of the kind of conversations that people are already having with themselves because of the amount of time that they are at home. So I think on that side, that is something that we chose to see as an opportunity. But I think beyond that is just trying to stay as much as possible aware of what are different methods that you can use through technology to engage young people and to be more inclusive of the spaces that you are able to have to gather the right kind of inputs or insights that you need when moving a certain project forward. Now, in terms of how a young person can take meaningful steps to engaging in volunteer opportunities, I believe like the first thing that is important is to understand what is the issue that matters to you as a young person. What is that battle that you want to work? For example, me as a young person before I joined AIESEC, the thing that I wanted to work for was ensuring that the world can be a more inclusive place for different kinds of young people. So my entire career of volunteering in the past 8 years has been around that problematic. So it's understanding what is the issue that you are really passionate about, and then from there trying to find the organization that or opportunities, local opportunities around you that can provide you with chances or opportunities or projects where you can actually advance those problematics. So I would try to assess that. And I think a more personal approach or a more personal advice that I have is also trying to see what is that genuine connection that you are going to have between yourself as a young person and the values that you have and the adult stakeholders that you would interact with in order for you to be able to engage in that volunteering opportunity. So I believe that just like staying informed and really trying to figure out what really matters to you, so that can be more meaningful and it can bring you a better reward, even if it's online or if it's not in the main way that you maybe wanted it to be before the pandemic. So that is my main insight on that.
Great, thank you. That was really, really helpful and good advice, I think, to young people that are following along as well as to others. Our next question is about, how youth can access the resources and the opportunities to not just, give their thoughts and opinions, but to really engage and to help with things like operations planning and management of implementing projects and so forth, as participants fully, not just as consultant people that are consulted. And I thought, DG Ramesh, this would be a great one for you to speak to.
Great, thank you, Krista. The Youth for Asia has become a very strong, blooming network. I just presented a few examples of how youth are involved in projects in Southeast Asia, but if you look across the entire Asia Pacific region, there are so many examples. What we have been typically doing, if there are people out there who want to participate, they can either work through AIESEC or contact Youth for Asia. We have, typically in all our projects, we have technical assistance that precedes the project, where youth have been involved in many projects, not all, but a number of projects in early stage design to provide inputs either through doing background research or undertaking surveys. And the technical assistance project will pay for it, will help defray the cost, as well as there could be a honorarium type of support provided, because that assistance is quite important. Second is in terms of youth providing ideas outside of these, as well as in the form of feedback by talking to potential participants, like for instance, either in terms of design of the project or in providing ancillary support. In Vietnam, for instance, we did a metro project where Youth for Asia, through an app called Safety Pin, was very instrumental in boosting the security, the passenger and pedestrian security around the metro area. So there are many concrete examples, but Youth for Asia would be actually a very good starting point in terms of the various avenues that are available.
Great. Thanks for that. And Iris, I wondered from the Youth for Asia point of view, if you wanted to weigh in on this one as well.
I think Ramesh already talked about the operating model that Youth for Asia does to connect youth to operations. But I think in terms of where to access resources, I think a starting point for young people who are interested in the operations of the ADB, it's best to also understand what ADB does and how projects are set up. So one of the things, for example, that I learned personally was to understand the design monitoring framework at the beginning. That helped you understand how ADB designs their projects and what are the kinds of how the logic works out on the field, so that when I do engage ADB officers, at least in the past, I have a better understanding of where they're coming from. So I think that's a starting point. It's there. You go to the website or you Google it. The resources are already there. So aside from engaging Youth for Asia, it's also to come prepared with the knowledge and the resources that are easily accessible through the internet. The other thing, though, is to also work with partners that we work with, like AIESEC and Plan International, and the other youth partners and networks that we have. They also have a direct link to Youth for Asia. We normally do engage them when we start preparing youth components that we want to propose to ADB operations staff. Back to you, Krista.
Thanks, Iris. And so the next question here, and I think it's been an inspiring talk, and a lot of people are interested in youth engagement and how they can be connected and supported. So for organizations that may be all over the world, not just in Asia Pacific, for example, maybe there's one question from one that's based in Europe. How can supporters from around the world be a part of this and be involved in engagement with initiatives like this? Ava, maybe we'll come to you first on that, because AIESEC is a global organization and you have participants from all over the world.
Yeah, in AIESEC at least, one of the ways that we try to give opportunities to international organizations is by engaging with us in multicultural or multi-country initiatives or events where we are giving young people the option of speaking up. But we also have, of course, placement of different international opportunities around the world. So I believe it really depends on what is exactly the problematic within youth employability that you want to tackle. Is it about accessibility of resources and opportunities? Is it about organizations in different third sector, or is it about grants for funding specific projects through resources that you have available? And then based on that, contacting organizations that are also multinational, such as AIESEC, or that at least have projects that connect to the kinds of objectives that you as an organization want to contribute in. I believe that kind of partnership would be the right way to start. Yeah.
Thanks for that. And perhaps, DG Ramesh, we can have a final word from you on this, because ADB, although it's the Asian Development Bank, also has members from all over the world.
Thank you, Krista. Just to quickly supplement what Eva said, in most projects, the selection of participants or partners, including NGOs, they are from member countries of ADB, but we also do significant co-financing with other institutions, global institutions, regional institutions. In such cases, we go global. So they can be, including entities, including NGOs, can be from anywhere in the world. And typically, we also recognize that NGOs are not like large consulting firms. They operate on a different basis. They have a different business model. Recognizing the issues and challenges that NGOs face, we also have a special framework in terms of engaging and working with NGOs. So European NGOs would be very welcome to partner with us in projects that they may be interested.
Thank you to all the panelists. That brings us to the end of our panel discussion and our question and answer session. And what we'll move into next is an introduction and launch of the Asian Development Bank's new knowledge initiative on meaningful youth engagement. It will be introduced by Mr. Chris Morris by video, and Chris oversees ADB's NGO and Civil Society Center. Let's go to the video.
Good morning. First, I would like to congratulate the City Foundation and the Youth Employment Funders Group who commissioned the white paper, and Plan International who led the research referred to in Iris's presentation earlier. It is a significant piece of research that advances our knowledge and our understanding of how to meaningfully engage with young people in youth employment programs. Recently, ADB's Youth for Asia gathered critical insights from the futures-oriented intergenerational dialogues in the Asia-Pacific Youth Symposium and the Southeast Asia Development Symposium. Here is a short preview of the two events.
This is the Asia Pacific Youth Symposium, a social dialogue platform that convenes governments, young leaders, and other stakeholders to discuss how the COVID-19 pandemic is affecting young people's jobs and employment prospects, and what this means for the future of work.
There is a need to focus on policies that stimulates job and employment opportunities, and particularly on demand side, not just giving the job, but actually creating the job.
If we want to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals and leave no one behind, it really cannot be achieved unless we fulfill the rights and welfare of all people with disabilities.
Welcome everybody to a crash course on meaningful youth engagement and youth economic empowerment.
The best way to ensure that a solution is relevant and has genuine and lasting impact is to not only closely involve those who will be affected, but to actually have them lead that process and be empowered with decision-making roles.
To overcome these deep systemic challenges, we need to develop youth economic empowerment solutions.
Meaningful youth engagement unlocks youth power, which young people can then leverage to address structural barriers that have previously impeded their participation in the world of work.
Welcome to the launch of the APYS consultations. We've had 3 knowledge sessions where we listened to young people and experts across government, NGOs, civil society, etc., and they made it very clear the future of the Asia Pacific, and in fact the world, hinges on the capacity of young people to fulfill their jobs and livelihoods and aspirations. We're going to identify emerging opportunities and build knowledge and skills. We're also going to facilitate cross-generational, multi-stakeholder dialogues to try and strengthen meaningful youth engagement practice. And lastly, creating pathways towards a better future where youth are economically empowered.
By and large, I would say the outlook towards technology is that it is going to be seamless, it's going to be more integrated, and it's going to be a new norm where it's no longer a choice, but a requirement.
I know that we are opening up, we are building a world where we are more thoughtful of that. We need to reach a point that it is absolutely equal.
What we see today is shrinking spaces for civic society, for young people to really participate, to have a say in different policies, facilitating that kind of meaningful engagement, because it's really building that intergenerational dialogue.
Okay, so we have some participants with us joining from previous sessions. We are at 116 participants in the call. So that is fantastic. It's wonderful to see so many people interested in what the youth has experienced and what the youth can do post-COVID-19.
You know, there's only so much that the quantitative data can tell us. You know, behind that data are stories of real people waking up and making decisions every day that are impacting the future. It's why Youth for Asia sees futures as like a toolbox for meaningful youth engagement and a way to bring generations together.
The problems and the gaps that we have identified have been long existing, and the pandemic has just sort of highlighted them or exacerbated them in some cases.
To move us from the history to the future, we look forward for better academic industry linkages, which will help us to so that we know which skills are in demand and the government can support through the policy intervention.
So I think it's the time for us to acknowledge that they're kids and they know a lot. And that our future, like they said so many times in this whole symposium, they are 100% of the future.
In both events, participants emphasise the importance of ensuring jobs and livelihood prospects remain inclusive, and how this can be achieved through meaningful youth engagement. This remains especially relevant today, when young people's already precarious positions in the labour market are being further impacted. In a research that ADB conducted in 2020 with the International Labour Organization, we sought to understand how young people were affected by the COVID-19 crisis. We found that young workers and entrepreneurs were significantly and disproportionately impacted by the pandemic in terms of job disruptions, including reduced working hours, impeded access to education and training. Young women are particularly badly affected. As countries shift to recovering from the pandemic, it is even more important that young people are recognized as assets and active partners who can make valuable contributions to development projects and their outcomes. Youth for Asia has been embarking on a journey to meaningfully engage young people in ADB's projects since 2015. We strive to not only leverage the unique contributions of young people, ADB and its partners, but also to provide thought leadership, particularly in understanding and mainstreaming of meaningful youth engagement as a practice and developing the evidence of its effectiveness in Asia Pacific.
Youth Voices in Youth Employment, a roadmap for promoting meaningful youth engagement in youth employment programs, aims to inform and strengthen the engagement of youth in the investments, policies, and programs that impact them. This report, commissioned by the City Foundation, establishes a first-of-its-kind roadmap that guides funders and implementers to effectively embed youth voices and rights into their youth employment strategies and programs. It is our hope that this roadmap inspires others to take additional steps to meaningfully engage youth and also serve as a basis for future projects.
Building on City Foundation and YEFT's white paper, I am pleased to share that ADB is funding a case study research that focuses on understanding how meaningful youth engagement adds value to development and the various barriers and enablers to achieve it. The research will be guided by a diverse intergenerational consultative group who will help to make sure that our findings are immediately relevant to governments, policymakers, and youth in the region. Furthermore, true to the nature of meaningful youth engagement practice, case studies will be developed by intergenerational teams. Through this close youth and non-youth collaboration, we will aim to ensure unique and profound insights that will further advance meaningful youth engagement knowledge and practice. So on behalf of the ADB, I would like to invite potential partners with ongoing projects or who have recently completed projects that incorporate meaningful youth engagement to join us in this endeavor. We are specifically looking for partners to join us co-leading specific case studies as part of the wider research initiative. I hope we will have some potential partners follow this session today. Please reach out to us. On a final note, I would like to thank everybody for participating today, especially the speakers and our host, Krista from Plan International. This session marks our continuing commitment to helping governments, development institutions, private sector companies, civil society organizations, and youth-led and youth-focused organizations on working together and achieving a more prosperous, inclusive, resilient and sustainable Asia and the Pacific. I look forward to continuing our work with the youth of Asia and the Pacific and expanding our future partnerships, working together with meaningful youth engagement across the region. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Chris. And of course, that is a perfect opportunity for many of you to become engaged with this work with ADB and with Youth for Asia. So we hope many of you will. We've come to the end of our session, or almost to the end of our session today. And one thing we would like to do is to give all of you the opportunity to feedback on it. Youth for Asia has prepared a feedback form. They like to walk the talk, and so they are making sure that monitoring and evaluation is a part of all of the work that they do. If you could take a screenshot of the QR code and go to the form and fill it back, we would really appreciate your feedback and look forward to hearing from you. Give everyone just a moment to do that. Before we move on to the final bit here, which is the funnest part. Desiree Lanosti, an artist and part of Tofu Creatives, has created a graphic recording of our session here today. Desiree?
Thank you, Krista, and thank you everyone for such an engaging discussion. So I'll just walk you through the visual journey of today's session. So we started with Krista setting the scene on how Asia is still the most youthful region in the world, how there is no gender equality in the world, and how we must continue to create opportunities for girls, women, and vulnerable populations. And over to our keynote, to Ms. Oza, she also set the scene by saying that COVID-19 has been a global game changer and how we must pay attention to human capital development and how the role of youth in digital technology development and recovery is going to be really crucial. And then over to our panel, we started with Iris, who discussed meaningful youth engagement and its pillars. And this includes youth diversity and representation, having an enabling environment, having intergenerational collaborations, youth participation, youth empowerment, and she highlighted how young people are empowered as co-equals. And as for Eva, she discussed how leadership is the fundamental solution and how we must place confidence in young people. She discussed the battle of youth employability, how young people really have strategic insights that should be listened to. The biggest obstacles are the lack of opportunity and lack of money and opportunities, and how their current programs include Heading for the Future program and Global Talent and virtual trainings. And over to Sveta, she discussed the importance of futures thinking and appreciative inquiry workshops, and how this has really been important in harnessing the energy towards preferred futures rather than focusing on problems. She also discussed youth-led community projects, which include awareness, training, and events organization. And over to DG Ramesh, who discussed some examples in the region about youth-led projects on financial inclusions, study on poverty and social analysis, the deep dive workshop of seeds, sustainable agriculture, and how this is really a continuous and sustainable journey for all of us. But he really asked the question, how do we operationalize these insights? How do we go beyond all these consultations and workshops? Okay, and we're ending soon. We had Christopher Morris in our closing, who ended with this call for research partners co-leading the case studies. He also mentioned in the video the COVID-19 impact on youth and employment and how this has been a challenging time. But these consultations also really gave stories behind all the data. And next, how youth-led project solutions are really crucial, and youth are 100% the future. And finally, there's just a lot of exciting progress on meaningful youth engagement, and this is very crucial for inclusive recovery, as the session title goes. Thank you, everyone. I've been privileged also to have been part of this journey from since last year in illustrating meaningful youth engagement. So thank you, everyone, for letting us draw the big picture with all of you. Back to you, Krista.
Thank you so much, Desiree. That was a wonderful graphic illustration of our conversation here today. Thank you, everyone, to the audience, to those who submitted questions, for following along with us here today. Clearly, the COVID-19 pandemic is not over with us yet, as demonstrated by the fact that I'm coming to you live from my bedroom today, which is also my home office. But it's never too early to start thinking about building back better, about a resilient recovery, and about the role of meaningful youth engagement in that. Youth in particular have very long timelines. They have more of their lives ahead of us. They have big ambitions, big dreams, and they want to be part of these conversations. They should be, and they have a lot to add. But today, let's go ahead and wrap it up. But I'd like to bring the panel back on the screen with us, because it's so important during these times, I think, to just stay connected to one another, to see each other, and to be able to participate in conversations like this. So thank you, panelists. It was so great to talk with you today and to be able to do this program as part of the annual meeting of the Board of Governors of ADB. Stay safe, everyone there, and I look forward to seeing you all in person sometime very soon.